30 years after first announced and nearly 20 after first implemented, Socialist China's one country, two systems policy finds itself existentially challenged as Chinese authorities move to securitize dissident Hong Kong and Hong Kongers as state enemies and national security threats. Securitization is a process by which state actors transform subjects into matters of security. The issues that are identified may seldom be essential to the objective survival of a state. Rather, they represent instances when an actor was successful in constructing an issue into an existential problem. Thus, securitization can be defined as a discursive process through which an actor claims a referent object is existentially threatened and thus encourages the use of extraordinary measures to diminish the same. A securitized issue allows state actors to prioritize it above other matters and allows them to employ rule-breaking behavior to counter the threat. But the question is, why is China securitizing against Hong Kong? And why now? Despite Chinese leaders' assertions to the contrary, it is contended that the one country, two systems ideology was and remains a Chinese security framework, practice, and policy intended to protect the socialist system from Hong Kong, Hong Kongers, and the Western world, as well as their competing ideologies, ways of life, and universal values. Over time, as dissident Hong Kongers added to, challenged, and defended the content and meaning of one country, two systems, it too became an object that the Chinese Communist Party felt compelled to securitize from and weaponize against. Here, security goes beyond the focus on the survival of the state and is expanded instead to survival plus, or securing the socialist culture and way of life of the citizens of China rather than just securing the borders. Unlike the rest of China, Hong Kong enjoys a high degree of freedom, including a free press, the right to assemble, and transparent accountable institutions. In the 50-year transition period between 1997 and 2047, China has been steadily trying to integrate Hong Kong into mainland Chinese culture, slowly eroding Hong Kong's unique attributes in pursuit of greater societal control. However, Hong Kongers have actively opposed any policy changes which contend with their capitalist system and way of life, especially through massive public protests as could be seen in 2014 against the introduction of national education courses which attempted to socialize Hong Kong youth into adopting a stronger Chinese identity, as well as in the Umbrella Revolution against the unfulfillment of Chinese promise of implementing universal suffrage in Hong Kong. In addition to that, recently against the harsh security law enacted by the Chinese government. Pro-democracy activists and lawmakers decried these moves and expressed the fears that it could be the end of Hong Kong as we know it. Meanwhile, Chinese officials and pro-Beijing lawmakers said it was necessary to restore stability following the massive protests. Constructing the Hong Kong problem as a threat to national security and thus enacting new laws like the National Security Law of 2020 ensures that the Hong Kong does not serve as an inspiration for Chinese citizens desiring greater freedoms to express their views, practice religion, access information from around the world, and protest injustices. Here, the Hong Kongers' right to dissent is perceived as a credible threat to the integrity of the socialist Chinese regime. Furthermore, Hong Kong, by virtue of its position as a global financial hub, is incredibly important to China. Relatively low taxes, a highly developed financial system, light regulation, and other capitalist features have made Hong Kong one of the world's most attractive markets and set it apart from mainland financial hubs like Shanghai and Shenzhen. Multinational firms and banks, many of which maintain regional headquarters in Hong Kong, have historically used the city as a gateway to do business in the mainland, owing in part to its proximity to the world's second largest economy and its legal system based on British common law. According to an article by the Council of Foreign Relations, Beijing's ideal scenario is to keep Hong Kong as a financial center without all the freedom. However, China's advances towards integrating Hong Kong into mainland China have sparked pro-democracy protests across the region, which may hurt Hong Kong's status as a global financial hub. The US State Department has also recommended the dilution of the special international status awarded to Hong Kong as it no longer deems it to be sufficiently autonomous from Beijing, which may result in measures hitting trade, finance, and investments among other areas. Moreover, many multinational companies with headquarters in Hong Kong have expressed their desire to relocate, possibly to Singapore. While some maintain that you really cannot sustain Hong Kong's international financial standing while stifling its freedom, other experts believe that Hong Kong will maintain its commercial status despite its democratic decline. In recent years, Beijing has moved to connect Hong Kong more to the mainland, creating instead a more cohesive economic region. Many firms and investors are betting that this increased connectivity will boost the amount of wealth flowing from the mainland into Hong Kong in the future. Therefore, there is an increased incentive to the Chinese government to securitize Hong Kong, curtail its liberties, demand obedience, integrate the region into Chinese society while retaining the benefits offered by the region.
The one country, two systems approach was China's compromise with the world while taking over the former British colony. It granted Hong Kong and Macau the ability to function as special administrative regions under the larger Chinese banner. To put it simply, Hong Kong was to remain a part of China, but didn't have to take on any Chinese characteristics such as socialism or then communism, or their currency, which implied they would have relative autonomy over their economy and finances. On the surface, this deal seems ideal. Hong Kong would not have to struggle with establishing its own identity or deal with the atrocities of sudden separation. The assurance of a larger government backing their inner workings without interfering was calming enough to the multiple multinational corporations who feared having to deal with the socialist takeover and the implications it may have on their profits. The West seems somewhat satisfied with this deal as they believed China had truly compromised on its belief system, and at the time they were not in a position, politically or financially, to undermine the agreement, nor did they have the military strength to act as a convincing threat. However, if you manage to look past the glow of apparent compromise and world peace, one might realize how the introduction and negotiation of the OTCS system benefits China the most. Whether this was brilliant planning and manipulation or just a happy accident, we might never know. Supporting OCTS was not a nod towards socialist modernization as popular discourse suggests. It was, in fact, a strategic security concept supporting China's second revolution, opening up and reform, while safeguarding and strengthening the Chinese Communist Party's dictatorship position. The perception of autonomy granted to the region by the mainland was used to secure long term Chinese Communist Party interests. In fact, the approval of OCTS is the first indication of the securitization of the subject of Hong Kong. It acted as a means of soothing the potentially hostile Hong Kongers who feared a drastic change in lifestyle and the loss of personal liberties. Anger and collective suffering are mankind's binding glue. The potential of the people of Hong Kong assimilating and actively dissenting against the mainland as a collective was alarmingly threatening to the government that actively advocated for a singular way of Chinese life. The introduction of the OCTS also managed to make all issues related to the functioning and governing of Hong Kong an internal matter, effectively removing it from international agendas and transforming it into a walled-off national security issue. This also allowed China to avoid potentially disastrous conflicts with the West, Taiwanese, and Hong Kongers. The OCTS eventually started acting as a leverage point against the threat of dissent from Hong Kong. Deng Xiaoping repeated ominous warnings of resolute Chinese suppression of major or serious disturbances in the territory, or even the total abandonment of the OCTS policy, if necessary. We slowly see the transformation of the OCTS as an apparent tool of safeguarding liberties to an active weapon against any democratic leanings of the Hong Kongers. Any liberties taken in reinterpretation of the basic laws that guarantee the OTCS system by mainland China continues to be defended as a matter of national security. While the use of the OCTS as a tool in the securitization of the subjects of Hong Kong may seem subtle, the new national security law takes on no such guise. Introduced in 2019 and passed in secrecy, the law effectively criminalizes any act of secession, breaking away from the country, subversion, undermining the power or authority of the central government, terrorism, using violence or intimidation against people, and collusion with foreign and external forces. It doesn't take much reading to realize that any act of dissent or disgruntlement with the affairs from the center are being viewed as threats to security and, more importantly, a Chinese way of life. Protest is a threat, democracy is a threat, disdain for Chinese characteristics is a threat, and autonomous Hong Kong is a threat. Here we see how a securitized issue allows state actors to prioritize it above other matters and allows them to employ rule-breaking behavior to counter that threat. These laws are in direct contradiction with international law, particularly the UNHRD and the ICCPR. Article 15 of the ICCPR, which requires criminal laws to be sufficiently precise so that it is clear what types of behavior and conduct constitute a criminal offense and what would be the consequences of committing such an offense. This principle recognizes and seeks to prevent ill-defined or broad laws which are open to arbitrary application and abuse and may lead to arbitrary deprivation of liberty. There is a clear disregard for international law on the mainland's end, and clearly no fear of repercussions exists, as the West and Global North heavily depend on using Hong Kong's financial institutions. The act of securitization of a country's own citizens is alarming and raises questions about where the mainland's priorities lie. Does it lie in sustaining the singular way of Chinese life they believe to be integral to the smooth functioning of China? Or does it lie with maintaining the perception of power and authority with the rest of the world? The bigger question at hand is whether a state should be allowed to securitize its own citizens. As Hannah Arendt eloquently pointed out, power is already lost when there is dissent. The perception of power is shattered.